on our board with Chris Wright, the CTO of Red Hat, and all those things combined. And then we launched the Inclusive Naming Initiative, which we connected to what was already happening in the Kubernetes community that Celeste and Stephen were leading to make inclusive naming ubiquitous in the Kubernetes code. So that's where it all started. And since then, we've had great leadership from everyone here, particularly Stephen and Celeste, um, to push forward. I think our inaugural meeting at KubeCon North America was North America? Yeah. It was North, yeah, North America. North America last year really set us up for success because we launched with concrete documents that people could use, and then a Q&A session where they could get help. As things have moved from there, and more of you have joined, and we're like, could not be more excited. And today, what I wanted to talk about was what do we want to do in 2021? So I was talking about what's our OKR, right? With folks like Celeste, Stephen, and a few others. And it's like, obviously, to make inclusive naming ubiquitous. And yes, that's all very great, but how do we do that? And so some ideas that we came up with are around, like, for in Q1, we should focus on what are the outputs that we want to, what is the output we want to achieve this year, um, with the benefit of the various work streams that we now have. And so the strawman proposal was a full set of guidance docs for each defined work stream by end of 2021. And then the second piece we thought about was that open source tooling around making and managing language changes and tracking them should be something that we could start to provide. Now, again, this is strawman, and it's all, I wrote it down in the agenda doc, so you all should have access. And so that's kind of where we were like the direction we were going. And then the second piece was we need to think about membership, because the more and more logos we show, the more momentum we show. And then, it just goes from there. It goes into the objective of making inclusive naming ubiquitous. And so this was something that I figured would make sense in Q2 and onwards, because we'll be closer to the next KubeCon EU, which, conference driven development. And so EU is again where we have the opportunity to host a meeting, and then again in North America. And so we can make those like goalposts for ourselves. Um, so so those were just a Q2 focus. And then ongoing, we need to be bringing in key organizations like standards bodies and the Linux kernel to expand the footprint to meaningful code bases and guide specifications out there. So because it all in the service of ubiquity, right? So that's kind of the level of detail the smaller group I talked to came up with. Now, I think this is a community initiative. This is not a Priyanka and Stella's show. So we need to have a deeper discussion with you all. To that end, we will be hosting a meeting on Thursday with the leads for work streams. Speaking of leads and Thursday meeting, Celeste, do you want to talk further?
Of course. FYI, if you didn't see it in the chat, we are in fact recording now, and it is Monday, February 8th, 2021, about 9:30 Pacific time. Apologies for the technical difficulties. As Priyanka said, we are moving into a planning phase for this that we are hoping to start later this week. And to that note, we need to talk about workstream leads. So first off, thank you very much to everybody who has signed up for a workstream already, and double, triple, quadruple thank you to everybody who's volunteered to lead a workstream. I'm just going to run through who's leading what really quickly, which is for open source, it's going to be Stephen and myself, and I'm going to say that Stephen's going to really take the lead on that one. For kind of working with companies, Andre from Dell, we're super excited to work with you. Standards development organizations,
Andre's killing it already.
Andre's killing it already, it's true.
Yeah, it's happening.
So for the standards development organizations, this work stream is around working with standards bodies to make sure that changes are being pushed through to those standards bodies. We don't have a lead yet. This is super, super important. And we do need somebody to volunteer for this, because this work stream cannot move forward without a lead. And I am but one, Stephen is but one, Priyanka is but one. And there's only so much that we can individually take on. So if this is something you are interested in seeing move forward, please get in contact with us. And let us know.
So that's that's a great call to the folks who have already volunteered for that work stream. It's an opportunity to lead it, take the information that you have already and the connections that you made, and run with it. I see Rich on the call in particular, and like his name, I keep thinking of him. I don't know if that is, not to put you on the spot or anything, but if it's something that you would be interested in, feel free to we can chat offline on Slack or something.
Yep. And Stephen, sorry to give you a task mid-meeting, but if you want to dig up the GitHub issue that we're working in to have people sign up and just drop that in the chat. Last call. The majority of the work that this body will do will be happening in these work streams rather than this one meeting. So the work is being done there. Please associate yourself with the work stream. I will be leading the language work stream. This is around languages and recommendations. We need a lead for community and tooling, formerly known as Intake. And this is for the organizations that everybody is a part of and how we can take in the tooling and the work and the documentation that you all are doing and bring it into what the Inclusive Naming Organization is doing. Once again, there are volunteers in that work stream. However, it needs lead. Marketing is going to be led by Bill Mulligan and Priyanka, and administration is going to be led by Ed and Stephen. This is really around like handling GitHub accounts and Slack and stuff. So if you have any experience with that, I'm sure they would love some help.
Can I quickly chime in?
Yeah.
Are folks mostly aware of what these work streams are and what they do? If you don't know the definition of one or more, please either just say something or raise your hand, whatever. I want to make sure people know what this stuff is. It took me some time to figure it out.
Yeah, so Priyanka, I'll admit, when I read community and tooling leads, and then there's open source leads, my brain thinks community means go find a representative from lots of different communities and bring them in here. But is that open source? Because it's sort of one and the same. And is tooling, hey, let's build some tools that can be applied to search for inclusive language violations and do the swap. So I don't know. I think if you could elaborate on that, because I think those descriptions to make sure everybody's level set is important and helpful.
Yeah. So the initial name of this work stream was Intake. And the idea for Intake was to welcome new contributors into this initiative to talk about, if there have been suggestions already about tooling, like, oh, I'm working on this thing, this dashboard, this plugin for CI, and I'd love to consider like integrating this into the initiative, or have you, or have us suggest it as a tool to potentially use. So the work stream is meant to be around that. I've seen lots of discussion, especially from last meeting with Mark Miller and Ed, around hacking on some stuff, right? And that's what this work stream would essentially be about, right? So one, if you have been in around the Kubernetes community or CNCF side, there is for Kubernetes, there's a SIG contributor experience, and that SIG is basically built around making people feel welcome and building like the community-ness of what Kubernetes does. And then CNCF kind of has a parallel with the SIG contributor strategy, right? So if you think in those terms, that's essentially what we're trying to do with this community and tooling work stream. Now, so my initial feeling on this was, well, if we're going to be writing a bunch of tooling, like, isn't the tooling going to be open source? Isn't it something that is part of, like, couldn't it be something that would be part of the open source work stream? And you can totally argue that, but I think there are some people who are not interested in writing tooling, or not interested in drafting documentation about about how people get started here, right? So we're not necessarily trying to say that the open source, we want to say that the open source work stream does not need to be that, right? and that the contributor experience for people who are coming to this group, as well as the tools that we want to output from this group, can live in that community and tooling workstream.
So open source workstream it will produce documentation and guidance for open source projects to be INI compliant, basically. And I'm just rehashing to make sure I understand. And the community and tooling workstream is about onboarding new contributors and also working on tools that people may have used other places that we can bring in, or net new hacking. Is that correct?
Yep.
Does that help, Jim?
Yeah.
Open to different naming too, by the way. Like if we could, I'm happy to call it ContribX. I know we went back and forth on it.
Yeah, we played around with it a little bit, and like I think where
How
we
about
landed.
Intake and tooling?
Huh?
Sorry to cut you off. So sorry to cut you off. But what about intake and tooling? Because community is the confusing word, right? In community and tooling. You can take on it.
I would like. I don't know. I know intake
Fair.
was I know intake was a confusing bit, and
Right.
based on some suggestions on the thread,
Fair.
someone threw up community, and we're like, oh yeah, community works, and then it's also tooling. So like we can play around with the names again, because we're a naming group, right? But as long as the intent is clear to start,
fair.
we'll. If people feel strongly about the name, then we can workshop it a little bit. But I think the intent is clear now.
Yep.
Yes?
Yeah,
no,
I
maybe.
agree.
Okay, great.
My brain thinks community onboarding, because I think the whole welcoming of contributors is, for me, is an onboarding process. But
right.
Anyway, okay.
So what's interesting is like this is kind of a horizontal or program level work stream as opposed to one of the vertical ones. So in each of the community, the company enterprise work stream, and then there's the SDO work stream and an OSS work stream. Now, from a program level, we want to bring more people and tools into our initiative, right? But from these vertical levels, you're going to want to figure out how to do that on the vertical side too, right? So like, how can I take this information back to my company? How can I take it back to my open source project and do the same? So you could argue that like both of them will have documentation around organizing a community, but the community will be of a different scope. For a program level work stream, it's going to be for us. And for a vertical work stream, it's going to be for that community that you're talking about.
Okay, so just to wrap this up, because we are a little short on time. Names are flexible, but that work stream regardless needs a lead. And just to give you a bit of an idea of like what we're looking for in terms of commitment from a lead. So on the weeks where this group as a whole doesn't meet, the leads meet. So we typically do like a leads meeting on the off weeks to talk about what we want to talk about at this meeting, what we need to keep moving. Aside from that, what a lead will pretty much do is project manage and define the structure and way that that particular work stream works. It's a commitment. It's probably not a huge commitment, is my instinct, but we'll see as we get going. And frankly, this is the kind of thing that will look good for a lot of people going forward. Career-wise, so I do recommend taking up leadership if it's a sparkle in your eye.
To Andre's question in the chat, how about once each work stream gets up and going, post an intro paragraph on what it does, covers, etc. on GitHub. Perfect. That's exactly the stuff we'd expect to see. Once you have a work stream lead role, you'll note that Andre, and we might be chatting about this later in the agenda, that Andre scheduled a meeting already for his work stream, right? So like once you have that hat, go forth and produce, and it will be well within your scope to define what the scope is and what it should and shouldn't be. Right.
Yeah.
So.
Speaking of which, for those of you who have signed up to leadership, please send an email to me. You'll find my email in the doc. It's celeste@cncf.io. Please
So-
email me your contact information, in particular, your GitHub handle, what you are on Inclusive Naming Slack, and 3, where you would like calendar invites to go. The email address where that is okay. Sorry?
Leads list instead. Send it so all of the leads have it.
Yes, good call. We are taking a hard pivot in real time. Can you sorry, Stephen, can you find the
I'm gonna
thank
post
you
it.
so much. Okay, do what Stephen is recommending and email the working group or the inclusive naming leads list so that all of us have your email. We will add you to that mailing list because you are now a lead, hooray. And B, like we said, we're planning to do a planning meeting later this week with the leads, and that will get you an invite to that meeting. If you can't make it, that's totally fine. We would appreciate it if you can try, though we understand that the lead time is short. For everybody else, as I mentioned, there's a planning meeting that we're planning to run on Thursday this week. And what we will be going through are the items that are posted in this discussion thread. And to a certain extent, what we've posted in the mailing list. And what we're looking for here is lots of people have lots of ideas of like what those groups should be doing. And what we're planning to do in that meeting is to sort through what we think we should be doing, what we think we can accomplish, and start building ourselves a backlog, both as a larger group and like specifically as to what each work stream needs to start accomplishing. So please make sure that your ideas are captured somewhere, that written down, so that we can start to sort through those things. By and large, we're open source people here. And the way that life typically works in open source is that the initiative that has staffing behind it, or that somebody is actually willing to drive with their own time and effort, are typically the things that get done. So bear that in mind as well. Your passion project gets done if there are people willing to do it. And I think that's all I personally have to say.
I wanted to add one thing. So going back to that overall goal, right, of making I&I ubiquitous and how event conference development, KubeCon EU is coming up in May 4th through 7th. And what I'm hoping for is that this group, by that time, the work stream leads will have clear definitions of what their work stream does. And ideally, we have one document each released from each work stream to share with the world to help everybody as they're making these changes. This may sound arbitrary, this may sound annoying, but I just want to I think one of the best things we did when we launched was to launch with concrete docs, concrete help. And that's what we should do for each time we have a big meeting, because it pushes us one leap forward and ensures that we are making a net positive impact. I'm totally happy to discuss if folks want to do something else, something different at KubeCon, but we need to know that that's an output displaying time. So just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of that. If you're not a lead and you're an attendee and more like consuming information for your companies, it's also relevant because that'll be a great time to show off what you're doing internally. We'll make sure that the structure is such that we can show off more and more people's good work, as well as the backbone behind it, which is the materials provided by I&I. Does that make sense to folks? Any comments on it?
Works for me, Priyanka.
Yes.
Oh, hi, Dale.
Hey.
Awesome. Cool. All right. There's a question in the chat by Mark. One question here. Do we want to consider the issue within the context of source code or only prose? Let me read this out.
Yeah, my question there is,
Yes.
sorry,
please.
You know, if you go onto GitHub, for example, the canonical example of inclusive languages is master-slave issue. And if you search for that on GitHub, you obviously find tons of examples of that and a lot of code repositories. And the question is whether or not we are aimed only at sort of basically written language that's in the form of documentation, communication, whatever, or are we also trying to address the issue within actual source code itself because it affects the kinds of tools that we ultimately need to develop?
So I think that's a discussion across. It's really going to depend on. So short answer is yes, but it's also going to depend on the context, right? So if you are, you know, for example, in the open source work stream, right? For us in Kubernetes working group naming, right? Some of the things that we're concerned about is like one, having the discussion, making the recommendation, thinking about if the recommendation, how the recommendation plays across multiple contexts, and thinking about the execution path, right? So we don't personally handle the execution, we leave it to the code or content owners, right? So if it's something that lands on the website, then it's like considered content, right? And would be like SIG docs, right? If it's something that is, if it's something that hits the API, right? It's SIG architecture, right? And it's an API review discussion. It's a potential deprecation policy enactment, right? So it depends on the context, and I think the same would be true for a company, right? So some of the questions that have come up for me are like, well, if we're going to make this change, how far back do we go? Do we do it for releases? Do we do it for all of the documentation? Do we only do it for, we're saying we're starting this inclusive naming thing here. Do we only do it for everything moving forward, right? Like discussions like that. So it's really going to depend on context, but absolutely, it's code and content. It's anywhere you see these terms.
Yeah, the other way to keep in mind is that not every project is actually a project implementing a standard for which an SDO has defined terms. And so these things often, I saw a comment go by about some code changes to rely on other projects making changes first. But essentially, these things have to work their way upstream to their roots so that we can actually get the change that we really want in the system. And that's actually part of why it's good to bring people together from not only companies in open source, but standards here. Because a whole lot of this stuff, at least in certain industries, has to get cleared all the way up to the level of standards.
And that's a really important point because we've had some companies who think, well, you know, tell people they got to get it done in 3 months and you can change everything, including code. And it's really important for the people attending this inclusive naming working group to reinforce that there are upstream and downstream dependencies, and you don't just change this in isolation. So you made a really, really important point there. I want to make sure everybody really, really understands that, especially for the code, but it also affects documentation as well.
We actually took an itty bitty fun example from Kubernetes and brought it to, so we did a maintainer circle session with CNCF contributor strategy, right? And the scenario was essentially, it was code that it was black box, right? Was the term. And the fun thing about it was one of our dependencies was the black box exporter, right? So what happens there? You know, do we have the opportunity to affect change in a different project, right? Can we only change our references? Do we leave it as like this is an exception because it's a dependency, right? Like how far can we go, right? So having those kind of discussions are important too, and that kind of leans to Dale's point about like it's in your project or it's in your company, but it's everywhere that it might touch. It's everything that you might pull in to your branches, right?
And that's why the lead for the SDO work stream is really important. So let's make sure we find somebody to do it. The good news is their participants are there. So one of you folks could just take the lead for now. As Celeste said, it's not like you're doing the heavy lifting of the work stream. You're just being the leader who's like supporting people and ensuring the work gets done. So please consider it, the folks on that list. We'll probably reach out one-on-one to you as well and try to sort this out before Thursday. Cool. All right. Any other points that people would like to bring up? Let me check the agenda real quick. I don't see anything in the open discussion section, but if you want to bring anything up, going once, going twice.
I'll
yes.
throw one out real quick. So as we're forming all of these things, you'll note that the administration workstream is currently restricted access. Part of the reason for that is because this is sensitive, essentially, right? And we're just getting started, so we need to be extra careful in some of the things that we're doing. But one of the things that we take care of is Slack. If you've had problems, getting into Slack, please let us know. I think I fixed most of the problems with an inviter at this point. But Slack, just considering if we need a Google Workspace or something, access for various assets, and like if it's controlled access for Google Docs, how do people use the meetings? Can we if you're a workstream lead, can I generate a meeting easily? Do I have the host key for something, right? So solving those problems, I know they are problems today, and will be as you're spinning up your work streams a little bit. Please be loud about them so I know which ones to focus my attention on first. But anything that is maintained on the website, anything that is related to Slack, anything that is related to our GitHub org, I know people were asking about where do I put issues. If it's something that you see that is broken on the website, put it in the website repo. If it is anything else related to work streams, you want to spin up a discussion, open it in the org repo, right? It may not be the perfect place. We may end up federating out, to various repos depending on the work stream. Like tools may end up being its own thing, but it's still early days. So I'd say let's keep everything in one place for now. Have the discussions. I'll be working on like labels and all that stuff so we can actually organize that stuff and getting whatever is in there. I think most of the stuff is already filed in project boards. If it's not, we'll get it in there. But for now, you have the power, like generate discussions on GitHub, generate discussions on Slack. All of the workstream channels exist in Slack now. So if you are part of one, leading one, interested in joining one, Slack is the best place, I think, for the synchronous communication. And if it's an issue that you just want to post to the group, you can feel free to post it in the inclusive naming GitHub/org. Cool.
Would you mind? So I tried to take notes, Stephen, but would you mind putting the repos where you want, for web, you wanted one place and the other in the notes in the doc?
Yeah, for sure.
It's in the open discussion section. Cool.
Priyanka, I got another one for you, real
Yes.
quick. I had somebody else take a look at the site and they were confused if this effort is under the Linux Foundation or is it a standalone? And I was wondering at some point, do we need some clarification to say, just for people that are passing by, is this an offshoot or is this an independent effort that companies are coming together, or however? Because I went to the website again to double check and it doesn't clearly state one way or the other.
So are you able to, is it unnecessarily ambiguous, or is there language there that would suggest an association?
I think it was ambiguous. I think they had heard from somebody else, so they thought it was a Linux Foundation. So on the website, I don't think there's anything that indicates the connection other than the participating organizations. But I think maybe within our own leads and our own communication, as whatever the official line is that this is a standalone or effort, bringing together different organizations working in conjunction.
Yes, that is the case. This is Linux Foundation is participating, founding partner, participant kind of thing for this. But it is definitely across, it's an open initiative for anyone and everyone. We are getting a lot of help from LF for sure. We're talking about getting a G Suite with the tooling, etc. LF's going to help us get that, but they don't own this.
Got it.
So to speak. And we can definitely make it clear. I think part of it is also a lot of us who kickstarted it, we are LF people, and so there's that natural association that happens, but we can try to make it more clear for sure.
Great. Thank you.
So since we were just talking about it, would you mind filing an issue on the org repo or the website?
Good
repo?
practice. Good
There
practice.
All right, everybody, we have 10 minutes left. Do we have any final comments or questions?
Hi, this is Rich. I have a
Hi.
question. I went to the Slack to go PM Stephen to talk about the chair stuff, and it says your trial of Slack standard ends in 3 days.
Oh, I see it too.
Slack is a thing to fix as well.
So
That's already on my radar.
I
Well, and
figured as much, just didn't want other people to be scared off.
It's okay. You won't get kicked off of Slack or anything. It just means like when you start a Slack, they give you some of the paid account features to start.
Your pro perks are going away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your the Slack won't go away or anything like that. We'll talk about if we actually need what kind of plan we need, and we'll probably look into like the open source option for Slack. So.
Awesome. Anything else?
So I can add it to the issues just discussed, but has there been outreach to like Apache Foundation, Eclipse Foundation, Open Infra, et cetera, to pull those folks into here to make this truly a, go beyond LF engagement? Because I've heard the same thing. Oh, is this another LF effort? And understand the positioning that, hey, it's bigger than that. There's a bunch of LF folks, CNCF folks, et cetera, involved in it. But to the degree we can get other foundations and communities involved, make sure we have awareness to them. Maybe the awareness falls underneath the marketing effort of things as well as the community onboarding things to find and reach out to them. But
So
I think that's a very fair point. Oh, sorry, Stephen, please.
No, go for it.
Oh, I was going to say that I have not done outreach yet. For me, it's been a little bit of, I just wanted like the structure a little bit set before we did more outreach to more people, because I don't think interest is our issue. We need to kind of start having like a workflow in which we start delivering. Yep. So my hope is, here's what I'm thinking. Oh, Amy, that's awesome. There we go. We have one person we know who we can work with. But my hope is that once we have KubeCon EU happen, where we have delivered more stuff, our work streams are like functional, that's when I want to go and do the outreach to, or just add just before, so that we can add them to that meeting. That's the plan from my perspective.
Okay. So I think that this is also a great topic for not necessarily like, in addition to the marketing work stream, but also each of the individual vertical work streams, right? So if you are already part of open source foundations, you're already part of aggregates of companies and foundations and people that want to speak in your work stream. That's the kind of thing that you would talk about too, right? Like, hey, I noticed these people aren't in. Let's get them in, right? So it sounds like a bunch of people are already interested, available, and working on these projects. So let's talk about it for sure.
Absolutely, because as Stephen has said, do it once. So we don't want to replicate things and have to do them twice over in different organizations. So it looks like, Rich, that you are working with Apache and Oasis and all of those people, and Amy, you're on OIF board. All this is great news. My suggestion is that as Stephen said, in the work streams you're in, let's have a conversation about when do you want to pull your other affiliations in, and let's do it at a time when we'll get the most out of them. BJ Smith, you can totally reach out to on Slack, as Ed says. I'm reachable there. And we can talk about just getting your organization involved, having your logo up, et cetera. So, and if you need my email, it's here, since I am the marketing workstream person. I should.
So one note for folks, please try to push like any of your synchronous conversation into Slack. Bias towards doing it in the public channels, as opposed to in one-to-one DMs, so that unless it's sensitive information, because that's where we want to see. That's one, seeing that work is happening across all of those channels is a good thing in general, and two, and make sure that the information is not just in one person's head or two people's heads.
Got it. And so, Stephen, just so I know how to do this, I'm in the Slack right now, and I see WS-marketing. That's where I can talk to anybody who's wanting to have their company and their logos be represented.
Yep.
Is that correct? Okay. So, folks, reach out to me on WS-marketing on the Slack channel. Then I'll help you out. Awesome. Cool. Productive meeting. Yay. Thanks, everybody, and looking forward to Thursday, and we'll report back after how it went. Have a good one, folks. Bye.
Take it easy,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye-bye.